Awesome. Yeah, hi everyone. To ACDC today. I'm filling in for Alex, who will be back for next ACDC. Yeah, I also guest hosted last week's ACDE. I'm a little bit less intimately familiar with the ACDC topics, so if I kind of make any mistakes or something, feel free to just jump in and correct me or anything. But yeah, let's get started. I'll put the link to the agenda in Zoom chat. Um, so first up, we wanted to talk about Fusaka for most of today's call, and the first topic there is DevNet 2. Barnabas, I think you wanted to give a status update of where we are at there with the launch.
Yeah, sure. So this morning at 10 a.m. UTC, we have launched Fusaka DevNet 2. We scheduled Fulu to be hit tomorrow around the same time in Epoch 256, and then we're going to do a BPO every other day. Basically, we're gonna do every other Epoch 256 is going to be a BPO change. I have put in the interrupt channel the exact schedule. We're gonna go up, we're gonna go down, and we're gonna go up again till we hit max blobs of 20. So far, the network looks very stable. This morning, I have raised some CL questions regarding NFD values and CGC values, and those fixes seem to have came in, except for Nimbus that is still have a incorrect NFD value, but I'm sure Nimbus team is already looking into it. Also, on the Nimbus EL side, we seem to have some empty blocks produced by Nimbus EL, and they are also looking into that. That's about it for now.
Sounds good. Any other topics on DevNet 2 or any action items we need to get to on that topic specifically?
So hopefully you're gonna be able to test everything, including checkpoint syncing and verifying the new status messages. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Sounds good. Yeah, then on to the next topic. General PRS updates. They are just the one thing I wanted to briefly get to is on ACDT on Monday, we briefly had the announcement of a new Sunnyside Labs report, but people hadn't really had time yet to have a look, so there wasn't really much discussion. So I just wanted to give it some room again today in case there was any follow-up, anything people would want to briefly talk about. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I think we have someone from Sunnyside Labs on the call as well. If you want to say a few words on just the headline findings.
Yeah, hi. So, regarding the network bandwidth limits, we retested with 8 validators, as Barnabas pointed out from the ACDT call, and we found much less bandwidth usage by Prism, and we will retest all the other CLs with DevNet 2 spec once DevNet 2 is stabilizes. So yeah, we will give you guys more updates on this. And also, we've contacted at least one person from every CL teams if they need something. So please let us know, then we can run or prepare something for individual teams upon request. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Were there any comments, Barnabas? Yeah.
Not regarding this, but regarding the net.
Ah, sorry. Yeah, then yeah, let's proceed. Go back to that then.
Yeah, so I have quickly enabled Watchtower on DevNet 2. So this means that if you push a new commit to your existing branch, Fusaka DevNet 2 branch, and we trigger an automatic Docker image build, we will automatically pull the images every 2 minutes. We're going to be checking if there's a new Docker image available. So in case you push now something to that branch that is untested or something that's broken, that might take your entire client offline.
I just want to ask because SIGP doesn't have that branch, but you're saying if we make one that we can continue to iterate on that and it will be built
Yes.
automatically? Okay.
Yes.
Sounds good. Then just to come briefly back to the Sunnyside Labs point, was there anyone who maybe also or had a look or any follow-up questions or comments regarding the report for Monday? Anything more on this topic? Otherwise, are there any general, like we have a few concrete updates to go through in a second, open PRs and discussion of BPO strategy and spec freeze, but before that, any general kind of PRS testing updates? Okay, I mean, I assume just like everyone was waiting for DevNet 2. Okay, then let's go to the specifics. We have a few open PRs we wanted to talk about. Justin had put them into a comment on the agenda. Let me briefly link that. That was 5 open PRs, although the last one is not specific to Fusaka, so we'll talk about that separately in the section afterwards. So it's only the first 4 here that we will want to briefly talk about here. Basically just to make a decision ideally today on like whether to merge or close them. I'll just go through the 4 of them. So the first one, 4393 by Anish from Nimbus, I think. If you're on the call, could you briefly talk about this?
I don't know if Agnisha's I'm here I'm on the call. It is Agnisha's PR.
Yeah, if you have the context on this, then that would be great, yeah.
Sure. So I believe this is the one where it removes the peer sampling, and correct me if I'm wrong, because that's what I'm gonna that's my back. And so the idea is peer sampling was an earlier iteration of a broad design goal that now is being fulfilled in a different way. I want to kind of avoid getting into too of the details here. I can talk about them if people want, but that validator custody, and so it essentially got replaced a little bit by validator custody in its overall role. And importantly, not a single team. We haven't been testing it. We haven't been deploying it. At the most anybody is really kind of saying about this as well. Maybe in some future time, this might be a useful technique again. But the idea is like for now, we're practically not using it. Don't have it as part of the spec. If somebody wants to reintroduce, make it sort of align the spec with what people are doing and what we're actually planning on in the near term. And then if people want to reintroduce this in a future version of Pure DOS or full DOS or something else, then we can do that. But
Right. Thank you. I'm relatively little context on this. Does anyone else have comments on? I mean, it sounds plausible. Is the general agreement to merge this, or is there disagreement, or? Yeah, I guess maybe the better question, Barnabas, from chat is exactly like more concrete. Anyone opposed to merging this in? Okay, then I think the decision is to merge that. Awesome. Then the second PR is from Manu, I think. And I think I saw you on the call, right? Could you briefly talk about that?
Please tell me if my connection is bad, actually.
Will do. For now, it's good. For now, it's good. We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So the idea is right now, it is not possible to request a data column by route for finalized block. It is only possible to request by route column for unfinalized block. I guess this comes from the copy paste from blobs, which itself was a copy paste from blocks, because some clients does not store finalized and unfinalized blocks in the same way in the DB. But for data columns, I guess it would be very useful to be able to, yes, to request finalized data columns by root. For the reason I described a little bit more in the PR description, like if you request a lot of data columns by range, but if for any reason there is few scarce missing data columns in the response, then you have to generate a bunch of new by range data columns requests, which is not very convenient. And if we can, request data columns by root, we can just generate only one request for all missing data columns, which is more convenient. That's all.
Any comments on this PR? I think I see Lighthouse in favor of merging. Basically, again, anyone who would be opposed to this PR? Then again, we can go forward and merge it. Perfect. Then on to the third one. 4406. I think that was from Justin in a conversation with people from Lighthouse, if I'm not mistaken. Is anyone from Lighthouse with comment on with context on the call that could talk about this one?
I don't know that it was from us for the clarifications. It was kind of as a result of multiple, like a discussion among multiple CL clients, but I don't see any issues with this. The clarifications are definitely necessary. I don't think they really change what was discussed at the Berlin app, but they make it explicit and they make it visible. So
Yeah,
talking
perfect.
about 4406, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry again. I'm unfortunately a bit low context on these, but yeah, okay. I mean, that sounds like it's not really changed, just clarification. Then yeah, if sounds like is there anyone that has context on this yeah, Francesco?
No, sorry, this is actually about the first PR again. So first conclude this discussion.
Okay, yeah, we'll get back to the first one in a second, but then first just to stay with 4406. Anyone who has context on this who would be opposed to merging 4406? Okay, then sounds like we would also be good to go with merging the third one. And then we have a fourth one, but before we get to that, then let's briefly revisit the first one. Francesco, you had some comments?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said it before, but I thought Jimmy might be here, and but I think I see he's not, and he had said on Discord like earlier this morning, basically like he had expressed that he doesn't necessarily think that we should get rid of the pure sampling spec. I think it would be okay to still go ahead and do it, but I think this is a fairly like I don't think removing this or not removing it, this is going to affect anything. Like as we kind of said, like the point of removing is that no one's actually implementing this. So I think it would be okay to make this change whenever. So maybe we can just let this like sit open for a little bit more and actually finish the conversation with all parties involved. Again, I don't think it's a big deal either way, but.
I personally, I mean, aside from everything else to that, I find a lot of value, and here I'm not trying to speak on behalf of Agnesia or anything, a spec that clearly delineates what is and is not actually real. We have a couple of other corners in the specs here where, especially in the more experimental ones, where they're not actually real. Nobody implemented them ever. And I think those are unfortunate too. But as this moves into production, I think it's worth being very, very clear about what is real and what is not. And right now, this is not real.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think if it stays, it should be like somehow made clear that this is not a part of the spec that the clients are implementing right now or something like that. I think the argument for not removing it is something along the lines of this is something that you could implement after Fulu was live without necessarily coordinating with other clients and so on and so forth. Whereas I guess if we didn't have it in the spec, that sort of maybe would require, then re-adding into the spec later. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't have a strong opinion on this. I am just saying, like Jimmy specifically expressed an opinion against removing it. But like, I think he just like this conversation, I think maybe was in a thread. I don't know, this kind of thing that it was a bit lost somewhere. And at least I personally don't find much urgency in changing this because it doesn't affect at all what's happening with the things that people are actually implementing. So I would consider maybe holding off on this for a few more days, but I don't know. I'm okay even if we decide to merge it, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, given that there was quite a bit of support for merging it, I would be. Is there basically anyone else that would be in favor of waiting one more round of comments for a decision here? Sounds like we wouldn't necessarily need this for Fusaka work to move forward. So default, I would still go ahead and merge it. But if there's anyone else who would prefer to hold off on this one. Sounds like so. If no one is implementing it, and in the chat, if they also, it sounds like Jimmy would not be super opinionated about this. Just had some concerns. So then, I would say, unless someone disagrees now, I think we would stick with the decision and just merge it. Okay, then let's stick with that. And if you feel strongly about this, then at a later point in this call, like speak up or otherwise. That's the decision. Merging the PR. Okay, then we have one more PR in this section. The last one, let me have a look. That one was, I think, also from Justin in a conversation with Casey, I think, originally, but also maybe several people involved. I'm not sure if either Casey or someone else who has context on this PR is on the call. I'll put the link in chat.
Is this about 4407?
447. Oh yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, 447.
Yeah, so this is just kind of clarifying some of the language around the requirement to disconnect if the NFD doesn't match. Currently says that you must disconnect at the fork boundary. And what will happen, and the way things have been worded previously is if you're not on any of the same topics and you're not agreeing with fork digest for the purposes of RPC encoding, you'll just downscore each other and not have any positive peer score activity, and you'll just disconnect. And so like we can kind of let that happen. And if people want to implement this, I think it's fine to leave it optional. And it seems like Raul agrees in the issue. And I think he introduced that wording originally. So the idea is to just clarify that you must not disconnect before, but you may after.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you said that the existing language was that you must disconnect before, because if that was the existing language, I would say that this, at the fork boundary, but not sooner. Oh, okay. No, never mind. So I do like the clarification. Yeah. I just thought I thought it was more needed. I thought the original language was wrong. It looks like it's just clarifying and adding things. Sorry. But yeah, I do support.
Awesome. Would there be anyone opposed to merging this then? Okay, then I think it looks like we will go for 4 and 4 on merging. So we'll also merge this fourth PR. Perfect. So those are the PRs, at least the ones directly relevant to Fusaka. The next topic we wanted to talk about is the question of spec freeze for Fusaka. Basically, like, are we ready for this? How close to it are we? I think Barnabas, you wanted to say something to get that conversation started.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was unmuted. Which conversation?
Oh, just the question of whether we are ready to do for spec freeze for the Fusaka spec.
I think we should be ready to freeze the spec, yeah. At least on the TIA side, once all these 4 PRs are merged in, we should be able to have another alpha release, possibly alpha 3, and then going forward, we should be able to do beta releases that will be testnet specific releases. Does any of these CL devs feel like there's still some open questions regarding pure dev spec, especially, or BPO spec? I think there was one more open BPO question regarding the max transaction, but that's more of a question for next week, I think.
And then just from my understanding, would that mean that because we will still have a DevNet 3, obviously, so there would not be any expected changes anymore between DevNet 2 and DevNet 3 from the CL spec side?
Yeah, from the CL spec side, only these 4 PRs, but none of these would be new. As far as I understand, all these clarifications are already included in DevNet 2. And yeah, these PRs, once they are merged in, we should be basically spec complete for Fusaka on the CL side. And then Fusaka DevNet 3 could possibly launch in approximately 2 weeks with the adjusted 7907 and possibly any other EIP that needs repricing for DevNet 3. And then DevNet 3 should be the frozen spec, and that should be the spec that is touching mainnet.
Right.
So
And so
all
basically,
values except for BPOs, because at this point, we still don't know the BPO values.
makes sense. Yeah, just for clarification for people listening, so we will still, like, this would only be freezing on the CL side, and then on the EL side, basically, we will have another Alcodefs next week where we would then fully freeze the EL specs. There's still a few very last things in flight there for DevNet 3. And then basically that the hope would be that would be the specs that as Barnabas just said, that would not include the specifics of the BPO fork values, even though they might, at least some initial BPO forks will be rolled out together with the client releases for the main Fusaka fork, but that's still separate forks basically. So those are specifically not what we're talking about here, freezing, but the Fusaka spec itself then would be frozen on the CL side. Of course, pending no issues during testing that actually require us to make further changes. Is there anyone that feels like we are not ready for that? Is there anyone that still has concerns that this would be premature, or are we generally feeling good about this? I mean, it sounds like maybe no one has serious concerns. And so my understanding is that there's at least a chance we would want to launch DevNet 3 before the next ACDC, right? So if next ACDC is in exactly 2 weeks, it could be that we're launching DevNet 3 before then. So basically that there will be no further ACDC before the Fusaka spec is fully frozen. So indeed that this is the last moment in time, basically. Awesome. Well then, with that, I guess Unless something unexpected happens, then like Fusaka CL side specs are frozen. Perfect. That was easier than thought. Okay, then we can move on to the next topic, the last one for Fusaka, which specifically is exactly about the part that's not frozen, which is the BPO strategy. So basically like these kind of tiny parameter-only forks that we will have after Fusaka. I think there was a Sigma Prime blog post, I think by Jimmy, but I think Jimmy's not on the call. If maybe someone from Sigma Prime would want to talk a little about kind of the Sigma Prime thoughts on this to get us started.
I mean, the post was mostly about like wanting to freeze the specs. So I think we more or less just decided that. And the Sigma Prime team was in favor of freezing the specs.
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought reading it there was also something about basically like biasing towards basically shipping. I don't know, because I thought there was also some opinions
There
on the
was a
BPO side.
suggested like target for the blobs that we would ship for up to maybe 18 blobs at the fork boundary, and then maybe have a BPO fork for 24. But yeah.
Okay, then yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. Then I kind of misplaced that article a little bit. Okay, then I think Barnabas and Pauri. I'm not sure which of the two of you. I think you both had some specific thoughts on the kind of the which BPOs to potentially bundle with the initial mainnet releases of Fusaka and yeah, basically the general strategy approach here.
Yeah, maybe I can start with some context. Typically for Deneb as well as Electra, we had a bunch of analysis on mainnet that was done to try and arrive at a blob count that we deem the network can handle. However, with PRDAS, that changes. We can do all the analysis we want right now. It just won't really mean much for a post PRDAS world. Which is why our proposal would be to have a very conservative bump immediately after Fusaka. So that could be BPO 1. So that would essentially mean we have Fusaka. We get roughly, let's say, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, worth of pristine data where we can compare pre-PRDAS and post-PRDAS. And then we have BPO1 that increases blob counts by a relatively small number to give us some scaling short term. And then we can actually do all the analyses that we want on with the mainnet data. And then we can schedule the next two BPOs, which can be a lot more aggressive if required. And in general, I think the plan should be that we should ship two at max 3 BPOs, because trying to do analyses beyond that on how the network might behave in the future is kind of hard. Yeah, we wanted to propose this as a general strategy for BPOs and see if there was any initial reaction or opinions from client devs.
When you say a small bump for BPO 1, is there a number that we have in mind already?
Yeah, I think we were imagining like 9, 12. But again, it's an open question. I don't think we have a yeah, the Sigma Prime post, for example, talks about 18 instead. I think one of the other side effects of this staggered-ish approach is that we can also let demand catch up faster. Yeah, Pawan?
Yeah, when you mentioned that like post BPO 1, like we can have more aggressive targets if everything looks good, like what numbers did you have any numbers in mind for that as well?
I think that's the tricky bit because until the data is there, I feel like it's hard to make a prediction. The good thing is Sunnyside Labs networks, as well as all the hardening stuff we do over the next one, might give us a nice upper limit. And then we can choose how close to the upper limit we're going on subsequent BPOs. But yeah, I don't want to give a number right now and then have to backtrack it once the data is there. I guess the overall question is then, are we okay with the blob numbers looking different on testnets versus mainnet? Do we want to just have all the BPO scheduled on testnets? What's our strategy? Because I would assume we don't want to go through the whole testnet BPO, mainnet BPO cycle for the future. I guess in general, are we okay with testnets having a different, they might end up at the same value, but they might have a different intermediate value.
You're basically saying testnets have a little more aggressive targets, that's all.
Yeah, exactly. So testnets could jump already to 20 blobs, for example, and on mainnet we might just do 18.
Makes sense.
Is that something that it would be good to have L2 or like basically if input from people that would want to test blobs at that kind of higher throughput level, whether for them that would be a headache or something if those there would be different values between the testnets and mainnet, or is that something that if you feel comfortable wouldn't be an issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure at the moment. It would be nice if we have people testing the higher throughputs on testnets as well, but I guess at least on testnet we can just induce the load if required.
I don't think there's any problem with testnet and mainnet have different configurations. It's just mainly like for the higher throughput, there might be situations where we cannot submit blobs fast enough, but like we can test that in testnet as well.
Sounds good. So in principle, it seems like it would be an option at least to have testnets at different throughput numbers. Do we have people like do we have opinions? So first of all, maybe Pari, a question in terms of like what do you see as the timeline for decision making on the BPO rollout strategy here? Like how much more time would we have to make these decisions?
I think until we start talking about testnet folks, we can essentially change our mind. It's a config value that has to be changed and will likely be tied in with the releases that go out for testnets. So I guess the next month.
Sounds good. So then I think maybe today is primarily about flagging this topic, getting a first round of basically people's opinions, and then yeah, taking it from there for next ACDC. Is there anyone else that like has specific like opinions on kind of like initial rollout, like what one BPO as I put it chat, like I personally kind of like two BPOs that already come with the Fusaka rollout, but like is there anyone else that wants to briefly present their opinion here?
Yeah, more than an opinion, a question, like how, if we did do this separate BPO, like not already scheduled in Fusaka, how long after Fusaka do we think that that would need to be?
I think at least on the data analysis side, we try to have 1 week worth of useful data. And then it takes, let's say, 3 to 5 days to do a good high quality analysis on the data that we've collected. And there's, I guess, one more caveat I forgot to mention earlier. With Fusaka, there's also some repricings that are required for increasing the gas limit. So that might be another sort of parameter we're playing around with, which leads to this, which leads to me at least feeling more like we should be conservative because we're playing around with a lot of parameters at the same time. But yeah, I think in general is about the release overhead and getting the community to upgrade. I would say we're looking at like a one-ish, two-ish month time, 1.5 month timeline, I guess.
And just to clarify there, basically because we would say we would decouple the throughput numbers on testnets from mainnet, we would not have to first go through a full kind of upgrade cycle for all the testnets. Is that right?
I guess that's the question right now. We could, for example, bake in all 5 BPOs and have the testnet sitting at 48 blobs or whatever the upper limit we agree on is. And then we just have to do mainnet because the testnets are already above the mainnet number. I guess that would save us a few weeks worth of doing testnets first and then mainnet.
I would actually recommend to bake in the Fulu and BPO1 numbers in the mainnet releases once it comes to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So like we wouldn't need to make a different release for BPO1. And then for BPO2, we could actually reconsider and see when it makes sense. And then give like 2 weeks notice to node operators to like roll out the new version.
Exactly. So that is the proposal, that when we have the Fusaka releases, it comes with BPO1 values as well as a timeline baked in, but not for BPO2, 3, and how many ever we decide after.
Is there a
Right,
reason
but
to not include 2 and 3 as like our optimistic values we're planning to choose? Like I think the upgrade cycle is quite long for this type of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the alternate approach then. We just pre-select everything and we decide to, let's say, abort or make another release to change the BPO values. The question is, which approach do we want right now? I personally feel like agreeing to a number and then trying to change it is messier than just agreeing to the number later. But I can see both ways if we want to be really aggressive.
yeah, and I think the good thing is we don't have to decide that today, but I feel like kind of it's already clear what the kinds of aspects that we have to weigh here against each other. Also, the specific kind of turnaround time for mainnet. I mean, Potus also said in chat that it's maybe a bit too optimistic to think that between client releases and mainnet a hard fork we could ever do 2 weeks. Might need a bit more for mainnet specifically. But still, if we can skip the test nets, that still means that the turnaround time for between client release and mainnet fork would be unusually short, at least. Okay, any other comments on this topic for today? Otherwise, again, decisions we would make in 2 and/or 4 weeks from now on the next 1 or 2 ACDCs. Anything otherwise BPO related that we would want to already have in mind for now in between for DevNet? So anything, basically anything about BPO related that is kind of short-term urgent?
One thing I brought up before was the idea of having a rollback built into the schedule, where we increase and then we decrease, just to make sure that that's a scenario that the system handles gracefully. And I think people push back on the idea of doing that in mainnet, but I think we should consider doing that in at least like Sepolia, like a test net where there are things that aren't only EL and CL running.
I think we're gonna do that on Hotkey.
Yeah, so we have Holsky as an option for that as well as Sepolia. Sepolia is also kind of a weird network because basically every validator is a supernode, purely because it's a very small network and most people run all of their keys on one host. So yeah, it's going to have different patterns anyway. So
Yeah, I don't know if there's any validity to this, but I was also thinking about things outside of EL and CL that might bake in assumptions about the schedule, and that if any of those pieces is fragile in a rollback scenario, it would be better to find that out when the network isn't already in trouble, was my thinking, but not going to push too hard for that.
I would continue to push back against this idea of BPO rollbacks as an emergency measure. It is never going to happen. We know we don't have the logistics for this in terms of the deployment or coordination. Now, you can argue that there are certain failure modes where it's kind of limping along, and it turns out that we just kind of disenfranchised a few more nodes and that than EIP 7870 really anticipated. And that I can see that kind of scenario. But the idea is something going seriously wrong, and no. Please don't plan on that. It's not going to happen.
How is rolling back a BPO different from just making another hard fork? I think it's an equivalent thing, right? Just do some new client releases.
Right. My point is not, of course, either is possible. It's that neither is an emergency measure. Neither is, oops, we pushed too far too fast, and now let's revert. This is my only point.
I guess if it's not an emergency measure, then it's also, then the BPO is also just fine. It works.
But they work as well as each other. But the basic premise of here's what I'm getting at. The basic premise of let's as practice for when we might want to do an emergency rollback, etc., then no, I would stop there and say we already screwed up really, really badly. That is and in a way that I is not going to be recoverable in that specific way would be my claim. So it's not that BPOs as a mechanism are worse than sort of ordinary hard forks. It's that the question is irrelevant to me. It speaks to an approach that is misguided.
Why?
Because
if we schedule something that is and we figure out it's broken, then we need to unschedule it, right?
I think Dustin, you're essentially saying that we'd be more or less testing in prod.
Yes.
We're raising it to a limit we think is fine. We're not quite sure. We're going to let it be there for a little bit and then quickly switch back. And that's what you're objecting to.
But that's not what's being suggested. What's being suggested is using the previous raise, the data from the previous raise, to understand if the next raise is safe. I don't think the idea is to first raise, oh, it wasn't good, now we're going back down. I don't think that is what we're suggesting.
No, but the argument for doing that was as practice for indeed doing it as an in-case measure, as I understood it. Maybe I misunderstood the proposal, but it was before the claim or the statement, the suggestion was, well, we might have to, and so we should find out first if some of these other sort of non-ELCL ecosystem entities react particularly badly to it, and let's do that before the network is in crisis. That's what I'm reacting to. I'm not against testing it per se. I see Marius just posted. What I am against is viewing it as a particularly useful escape hatch for the network planning as a whole, or BPO planning as a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
We have maybe to just jump in because we have several people with raised hands, so maybe we go by order. Potos?
Yeah, so I think you guys are having two separate discussions in parallel. So on the one hand, I think there was a suggestion of shipping two BPOs separated enough so that we can recognize that the first one wasn't working as well as we expected. The second one might be dangerous, and then that gives us time to call off the second one. And my understanding of, and Casey was suggesting to have an emergency release that would just roll back the previous BPO. And I kind of empathize. I agree with the first approach. Like we can schedule several of them as long as they're separated. We have enough time to call off the second one without any special mechanics. And I empathize with Dustin's point of view on rolling back and the mechanism to roll back, because if a BPO actually happens and it's an emergency situation, then any mechanism to roll back would be exactly the same as just like planning a new hard fork. It would require the same sort of release strategy, and it doesn't. I don't feel like we're gonna gain much by having an emergency mechanism to go back, because it sounds to me like it's exactly the same as just a normal hard fork.
Right, Enrico.
Yeah, to me, it's just we have now this mechanism that allows us to change things easier. So on one way, it's wrong that we can say, okay, based on this, we can then go on mainnet unsafely, and just because we have this escape patch that we can use it. But anyway, if we have to schedule BPOs in steps, right? So there is even a possibility where the previous BPOs is fine. When the next one activates, we see some network degradation, which is not catastrophic, but still degradation, and we can still plan for the next BPOs that put the blobs a little bit down. So we go back to a better situation, and we buy time to analyze things and improve. So I think like there is this possibility as well. It's not a full rollback, it's just scheduling something new and lower down the numbers.
Makes sense. Any other comments on either this topic narrowly or kind of BPO strategy in general? Otherwise, I would also bias towards trying to wrap that up for now, and then we should have that conversation actively async between now and ACDC in 2 weeks, and then maybe already in 2 weeks we can finalize our general strategy, maybe with values still pending further testing or something, but basically general rollout strategy. I think 2 weeks from now would be a good time for decisions on this, but for today, maybe if there's any further comments, then now would be the time. Otherwise, I would move on. Shaba?
Yeah, so from my point of view, the kind of baking in too many values is very much belief based, and we will have much more data later on. So I don't see a reason to bake in too many of these, because we can go faster, we can do slower. It's good to agree on the timeline that we want to have, but I think the baking in is I just don't see the technical value in baking in many values scaling, because there are many bottlenecks that can hit at every point of view. We will see, and we will learn from the mainnet, but we will learn also from tests in the meantime, which we can scale up testing. So it's not just learning from the previous bump, it's also more testing on the higher levels on larger networks. Yeah, so I would just bake in one, just to close it.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think then yeah, on next call ACDC at least we will talk about that. And I think the different proposals are basic categories, either one BPO baked in, 2 BPOs baked in, or multiple. And I think we've heard the different arguments already. So now it's about discussing it and coming to an agreement in 2 weeks. Awesome. Then I don't see any further raised hands. Shaba, if you could unraise yours. Then let's move on to I think that was the last point that I had for Fusaka. Is there any other remaining Fusaka points that we would want to discuss today? Okay, then we can move on to the Glamsterdam section. That one is a short section. We only have 2 items. The first one is just yet one more PR. That one is a very old one by Xiaowei that has been open for quite a while. I think there was some questions around what basically are the main blockers there. My understanding is that it would be a requirement if we ever wanted to in the future change slot times. I'm not sure if that's the only motivation for the PR. I'm not sure if someone that has context on this, sorry, the number is 3510. You can already see in the number that it's a bit of an earlier one. If there's someone here that has context on that and could briefly say something about it. Photos?
No one's raising hands. The original motivation comes from an EIP, a PR made on the spec. I think it was Jacek who's proposed it first. That was about like rearranging the slot, like changing the attestation deadline, increasing it a little bit, realizing that we're wasting time with an idle node during aggregation, and aggregation could be made shorter. That raised the problem that the spec is phrased in terms of intervals per slot. And if we have like a non-symmetric slot, like the different intervals have different timings, then it would be better just to like specify each of the deadlines in milliseconds instead of as an interval of the slot. And that's the original motivation for the EIP. And it turns out that if we change the total time of a slot, anyways, we would need this. And since this is a no-op for most clients, except perhaps like dealing with configuration and dealing with the spec tests, it's a simple EIP to merge as long as we don't change this form of the slot, because essentially clients don't need to do anything. That's why I believe, but I am in support of merging this as is.
Yeah, thank you. Is there basically, are there other clients have an opinion, or to ask the question the way I did earlier, like basically, like, is there anyone who would be opposed to merging it as is? And then Barnabas also asked the question in chat, maybe, is there anyone who would be opposed to, even if they maybe are okay with this being merged, would there be anyone who would want to wait with merging this until we have full life on mainnet? Is the silence because everyone is okay with merging it, or is the silence because no one else has context? Because then otherwise, like, I would just say we merge it.
Yeah, the only concern, as Potus said, is some noise around configuration. And I don't know if there is a possibility that we start breaking up a little bit some interop between clients like Mix, VC, and VN due to this configuration changes floating around. This the only risk that I see. So waiting actual follow is a reasonable argument. Even if I think that we have to go, we should go forward with this because it's a very basic thing that we have to do for everything else, like slot and EPBS. So we need to do that. So the quick, the better. But I see some noise.
Could we maybe target Glamsterdam branches with this spec? So like any kind of Glamsterdam DevNets that we're going to be launching, it would be built on top of this. Would that make sense? Because very, very shortly, we're going to need to start doing Glamsterdam specific DevNets also, even probably before we hit Fulu. So I would most likely not wait till we hit Fulu to merge this one in.
So this is not going back to phase 0. It's something that enables on a specific fork, correct?
I think the config would go back to phase 0, yes. So like you would need to maintain a different branch that is able to read in a different config. That would be your Glamsterdam branch or possibly an EPBS specific branch.
Yeah, I'm a little out of the loop on this. This sounded reasonable what Barnabas was saying just now. Is that a reasonable strategy? Basically merging it for the Glamsterdam branches? I mean, if we even have Potus and Barnabas agreeing, then I think we can't really waste that opportunity. Yeah, then I think basically, unless anyone wants to disagree, then I think that's what we would want to we want to do here. So merge it, but for Glamsterdam. Okay, perfect. And maybe last, Barnabas, just to double check, do you think that that's generally clear what that exactly implies for people?
I think so. At least it's very clear for me, and we're gonna be the ones doing the Glamsterdam testing as well. So it should be very, very obvious for everyone, in my opinion. It's just the question of what we want in Glamsterdam. That's going to be the next question, I think.
Sounds good. Then let's merge this basically for the Glamsterdam branches and move forward. We only have one remaining agenda item, which is also for Glamsterdam, and it is a headliner proposal. I think it's the last headliner proposal because my understanding is that the deadline for proposing basically is over now, and this was the last one that basically made it in. So starting next ACDC, assuming that we basically no longer too busy with Fusaka, we can then also open the discussion for picking headliners. For today, it would be primarily just the presentation. But yeah, Barnaby, I think you're on the call to talk about shorter slot times.
Yes. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Okay. Yeah, we've been playing timing games a bit with our proposal. We sent it in pretty late, so thank you all for letting me present.
And we can see your screen.
Okay, super. Okay, this is a short presentation to drive home the point that shorter things are better. We're essentially trying to make the case for moving to shorter slots for Glamsterdam, in particular moving from 12-second slots to 6-second slot, following an EIP that was originally written by Ben Adams and Donkrat Feist, and Julian and I joined more recently. So why do we think 2x shorter slots are very meaningful? The main message is that this makes Ethereum L1 a better confirmation engine, which is essentially the main business of Ethereum and its main value proposition. To give some examples, it reduces transaction inclusion from 6 seconds on average to 3 seconds. It gives you 2x censorship resistance from having 2x block producers per unit of time. It gives you lower DEX fees for users from having less value picked off by arbitrageurs, and so more liquidity providers, and so tighter spreads. It accelerates finality time if we don't change anything from the consensus, from what it is today, like 13 to 19 minutes, to something that's under 10 minutes. There's many downstream interop UX and cost benefits, and there's even more good things that are detailed in the proposal. So why make this proposal for Glamsterdam? I genuinely think that shorter slot would be a great option to consider, slotting it in at the time that Glamsterdam is expected to be released, meaning after we have ramped up to 48 blobs and to hopefully 100 million gas limit. I also think it's a good idea to make this proposal to accelerate conversations about it. I don't think shorter slot time is contentious. I think we all agree that generally we want to move in that direction. So I also don't think it's like distracting too much. And I also think it's meaningful to have shorter slot in mind when thinking about the various restructuring proposal. So what I'm suggesting is to pipeline our thinking between the two proposals. How could we achieve it? So these are like very high-level strawmen on the path to implementation. Let's say if we did decide to go with the route to include it in Glamsterdam, I think we first need like a very serious study of attestation and aggregation propagation time. In the EIP, the suggestion is 3 seconds for block propagation, 1.5 for attestation, 1.5 from aggregation. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that kind of make us reasonably confident that, yeah, this is possibly workable, but I think we need to be, just much more precise than this. Then the second part is there is a fairly large effort of just retrofitting the client and making the slot time conditional, mainly because the chain has been running at some different slot time until now. So yeah, I understand that it's not like launching a new chain that just has 2x slot times. Like there's overhead that comes from this, and then of course testing to make sure that everything works out. If we did not decide to do slot times in Glamsterdam, but instead to do that in H-star, and assuming that slot restructuring is what goes in Glamsterdam, so I think the path then is a little different. We obviously have a work of doing the slot restructuring, which involves figuring out the right one, testing, etc. We may not need to be so precise about the attestation and aggregation propagation time study, just because some of the proposals, they pipeline this, like they remove some of this stuff out of the hot path. And so, yeah, we may have an easier time figuring out like the right partitioning of the slot. There is still, I believe, the work of retrofitting the client with this conditional logic, and then still the testing that needs to happen for the slot time hard fork. One thing I want to point out is that over the last week, like we've been looking at the restructuring slots with the lens of these shorter slot times, and it brought up some challenges and opportunities, which some of them may be relevant, some maybe not. But I just want to point the high-level points because I think they're nice to have in mind. The first one is that whenever there are fixed overheads, like one of them is, for instance, the attestation and aggregation round, that happens at the end of the slot. These fixed overheads, they get worse, obviously, with shorter slots, because if their time is incompressible, then when you have shorter slots, you spend a higher relative share of the slot incurring these costs. There may be more ways that are interesting to get out of some of these fixed overheads. Like something we discussed a bit was the idea of essentially unbundling or pipelining the head vote from the source and target votes so that the aggregation can be moved out of the hot path. This is also something that we get in EPBS with the PTC and the attestations being earlier. And then another thing that I think came up quite a bit when we were discussing this is this kind of trade-off that exists between the propagation time and the execution time, and where we want to be on that frontier. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for your consideration. I'm seeing a very active chat, so sorry, I did not see the messages.
I think
sorry,
the very primary clarification that people wanted was just that basically by default you would also argue for having the throughput per slot, right? To keep the throughput per time constant.
Correct. Yes, yes. So there are many invariants that would need to be preserved. One of them is the throughput. Another one is the reward rate for stakers. Like it doesn't mean you get 2x the issuance, like you should still keep that constant. So yeah, keeping everything equal unless there's a strong reason that by the time we move to this shorter slot fork, maybe we have scaling opportunities for different reasons, but all else equal, we would only want to change the slot time and not like use that as a Trojan horse for making other changes. Yeah.
Mark, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I would just like to make a general statement that I think is useful for everyone that's going to be participating in this debate. I've been participating in it since the Berlin Interop, and it's been ongoing. And I just want to say where I think the debate is from my perspective and give people a chance to disagree on some just very general statements, which is that as far as I can tell, just based on where I think there appears to be consensus that we want two things, and one of those is shorter slots, and the other one is some sort of slot restructuring and pipelining. People are in various camps on that, but I think everybody wants both of those. And there is also consensus that we can't do both of those things in Glamsterdam itself. And so the debate is more or less about which form of pipelining and which order to do these things in. So does anyone disagree with those general statements?
I agree with them. Yeah. I think I've heard indeed that doing both in the same fork is not feasible. Unless I see like strong evidence to the contrary, I think I would make that assumption. And then I do think, yeah, it's a matter of first selection of a restructuring proposal. That's where I think actually having the shorter slot timelines can be helpful, even if I also feel that the discussion has progressed quite a bit and we have like much higher confidence. So yeah, selection of a restructuring proposal and then ordering between shorter slot time first or restructuring first. I think that's indeed the question. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad there's agreement because I see the things the same way. And from where I stand, I want to get both of these things into Ethereum as fast as possible. So I think there's also one more point of agreement on a limited statement that people may disagree about whether or not the restructuring, the favored restructuring proposal is 7732, but I think at this point there is agreement that 7732, regardless of what other trade-offs you might believe, offers maximal pipelining, meaning that for the same slot time, you have more blobs and more blocks than competing proposals. And I think there's also agreement that you can have shorter slots from 7732 than you could for competing pipelining proposals. So those are all the statements I believe that there is agreement upon. There may be others, but I'd like to give anyone a chance to disagree with that if that's not true, or if yeah, you don't feel that.
Yeah, Enrico?
I just want to make the argument why I think the restructuring in the form of 7732 should go first is because the 7732 form is allowing us to decouple the consensus block from the payload. And no matter you see, so reducing the slot time anyway, in some form, reduce the network resiliency. So in my mental model, going in that path first is wrong, because if you do the decoupling first, at least the argument we will have a much more resilient on the consensus layer, because the block will be much smaller, and the instability might go only on the execution side of it, and we will have a much better consensus blocks flow, my idea.
Makes sense. Then just a comment from me as a researcher, not as host. Basically, yeah, I personally am not super opinionated in terms of the ordering of these two. I do think, maybe just as a general comment, I think while yes, 772 EPBS, like we've been talking about for a long time, I think we shouldn't just be too quick in being like, okay, then obviously it should go first. I think that's probably where we'll end up with anyway, but I think at least it's good to take the moment of being like, okay, which of the two should go first? The one thing that I would say is, even if we end up doing slot restructuring slash EPBS or something like that first, it's still a good exercise to already do that while discussing what that would look like in terms of implications for shorter slot times. And so in particular, Mark's comment, I think that like basically even for shorter slot, EPBS is optimal or close to optimal for actually making use of the window, and so actually is in a way especially well positioned to then be shrunk later on. I think that's exactly the kinds of arguments we should look into. Yeah, and the one question I would maybe have for people is just to double check. We always say there's no world where we would ever combine these two. Are we certain? I mean, it sounds reasonable, and we should not do monster forks anymore, but is this something we are 100% locked in on, or is there like still a world in which these two could be in the same fork?
I would love to combine them, but I heard that Harry's head would explode. So
yeah, we definitely don't want that. Yeah, then let's continue with the comments. Ben?
I would argue, if we can shorten the slot times, if that's a possibility, then that should go first, because that has an immediate user experience impact. If we do delayed execution, that doesn't really change anything, or EPBS, that doesn't actually change anything in the user experience. So I would argue for a shorter slot, and then bring in EPBS or delayed execution or whatever to afterwards, to then allow us to start increasing gas again.
Mark?
yeah, I mean, I think the counterpoint to that is that, like, number one, we can't have as short slots as we can after EPBS as before. So like we may be able to get 6 seconds or sometime today, but we would certainly be able to do shorter after EPBS. So we could be like putting ourselves into a position where the slots are longer than they need to be if we do it the other direction. And I think
Yeah,
twice.
but you'd add that additional lag that you have to wait an additional hard fork before any user experience.
Say that doing two forks where you change the slot time is like a lot of extra work. Now we may not necessarily do two forks where we change the slot time. We may just say 6 seconds is fine. But even on top of that, there's a lot of work around timing of various things that happen in the slot that like handoffs is going to need to do. And, you know, if we did it the other way around, they're going to need to do it twice. So even if we don't change the slot time twice, they would have to do those timings twice. So that's the main, like, I think basically the main argument is, to sum up, something like we get to a world with both of these things slower, doing it the other way around, and maybe and getting to an optimal world where of even lower latencies is even slower.
Makes sense. Then yeah, maybe one more quick one for me. I just wanted to agree to some extent with what Ben just said, specifically from the scaling point of view. I understand EPBS has several benefits. Scaling is a big one, but not the only one. But in terms of scaling, given that we just never really made scaling changes in Ethereum in the past, or just for a long time, there is a bit of an overhang right now. So I think even without EPBS in Glamsterdam, we would still out of Glamsterdam have quite a bit of extra headroom for scaling with block level access lists if we so choose to do that, or with just general repricing that give us remove some of the worst cases. So in terms of scaling, given that if we scale immediately by a factor of 5, there's no usage anyway to take immediate advantage of that. So I think in terms of immediate impact, actually like delaying the scaling aspect here until H-star would probably not really be noticeable for users because we already still have like a smooth kind of scaling gradient. Whereas shorter slot times basically is a thing that otherwise you just don't have. So I do agree with Ben that just from a scaling point of view, basically like versus the benefits that shorter slot times give, it might actually be that there's a more immediate benefit for users doing it this way around. But again, that's just a very partial argument. Okay, that was the last time for me making comments. Any other comments? Obviously, there's also quite a bit in chat. If anyone would want to highlight anything out of chat on the call.
So one thing, I'm just wondering, maybe there was already some study done. What impact would be on the end user? Because likely a lot of these systems has a hard coded like a 12 second slots there, and it could be quite a big hassle for these systems to move to the new slot time.
Yeah, maybe quickly on this, that's two things I've identified that might be important to look into. Is first systems like explorers. Them I feel like because there are chains that look like ours, like Gnosis chain, that run at different slot times, there might already be like some infrastructure that is built that is flexible enough to change their assumptions. There's probably still some that is not ready, and I think we should identify those. And the second thing is something that was also called out by Terence, and that's included in the headliner proposal, the possibility that some smart contracts may have hard-coded 12 seconds in their behavior. That seems also, it's likely that there are some. The chain used to work with proof of work, which was variable slot time. So yeah, you would maybe limit the amount of the ones. But now I'm seeing that POTUS says actually Arbitrum contract itself has this hard-coded assumption. So yeah, okay, maybe there is something to be done there.
Mark?
Yeah, so wading more into like my personal views on the debate, I do think that in terms of the ordering of things, like that 7732 is just much more mature than shorter slot times for these kinds of considerations. But I mean, me personally, I would also like my ideal world is that we do 7732 and we for sure do shorter slot times the very next fork, which would give all of the stakeholders like the time to prepare for that, and could potentially be like developed in parallel the way that Electra and Fusaka were. If we know what the headliner is, we can do it in parallel.
Yeah, just because I've heard this concern about, I mean, obviously, like 7732 already has the benefit of actually like not just being specs, but having been implemented and so on. In terms of just the general implementation complexity, testing complexity of shorter slot times, this has been brought up in the past as a concern for even general Glamsterdam viability. Are there people that have opinions and views on independent of the ordering and whether we want to do it in Glamsterdam, but like how realistic it would be for shorter slot times to be in Glamsterdam? I see POTUS in chat saying a lot of work, but doable. Yeah, POTUS?
So I don't know. I gave enough time to Preston to express his opinion on this. He's the one that's been working on this. Has been working for a few weeks and has a branch that is already passing tests and compiling at least. A lot of things that need still to be changed. From the point of view of the code base, it's not something. I mean, people think we just have this constant that you need to change and that's it. But the second order effects are huge. We have a lot of timing places where you need to deal with, like, are we going to reorg this block or not? Is this block actually late? Are we counting attestations for the next slot early or not? Because we made a bet that we will reorg this block, and then we decided that this block is not weak. We need to reorg it back. We have cache, that those cache has timing expirations. So when are we pruning those cache? We have optimistic syncing that is affected by this. That is one of the largest, most complicated pieces of code on the CL side. We have for choice that actually keeps tracks of timing to decide whether or not the head is weak or not. So this, besides the blockchain part of it, there's so many places that the slot time changes affect that it's going to be quite hard to test. However, having said so, I believe if the choice is, I mean, of course, I'm against having this in Glamsterdam, but I believe that it can be done in a single fork if it's chosen to be one PR. It's just that I think that the number of things that need to be tested, the number of teams that need to be called, that it's just daunting to even start thinking about it.
Anavi?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with POTUS. My question is how much of that is just fixed work that we have to do no matter what? Like even if we were to restructure first.
All of it. So we are already working on it because we believe that we are going to ship this. And that's why we started working on this. We will have to do this anyways.
Yes, right. Yeah. So then it's really a matter of something is more ready now, so we might as well ship that first and have this big bundle of work like pipelined with the thing that is more ready. I think that's reasonable. I still, to me, like, yeah, from my viewpoint, the sequence of operation that makes sense from a feature perspective is really shorter slot time first and then restructuring. So there's a difference in opinion here, of course. But yeah, I do think highlighting the extra overhead of doing shortening first and then restructuring would be helpful to the discussion as well. What Barnabas asked in the chat, essentially.
Right. Yeah, is there anyone with a specific opinion on that specific question that Barnabas just put in chat? What's the implementation time basically of the two different orderings here? If we do EPBS first and then lower slot times, or the other way around, basically, is there anyone that thinks that just in terms of implementation time, the ordering here matters? POTUS?
Yeah, that was the argument that Mark was making, that we seem to disagree, but I don't understand why, because to me, this is a no-brainer. Testing the timings on this within the slot is going to have to be done, and benchmarking this is going to have to be done twice instead of once. So certainly there's an obvious testing overhead by shipping slot times earlier. So shipping EPBS earlier has less impact on the testing team.
Yeah, so to clarify, we are of the opinion that in getting both of these things into Ethereum, it's longer to do it. It will take more time doing it the other way around. When you want to look at, I don't know that when you just look at one fork, that it has any impact. But
can we have someone mute Dan? Oh, this account that's unmuted. Perfect. Okay, then sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Then in terms of because again, like the idea is not for today to make decisions. We also kind of only wanted to mostly highlight this proposal, have some light initial discussion just to highlight the questions or areas of disagreement. I think that probably we did quite well now. Then the idea would be again in 2 weeks if we are still very busy with kind of with Fusaka, that it depends a little bit, but in principle, if we have the room, then we will really kind of go into the discussion of what we should prioritize for Glamsterdam in 2 weeks. And so ideally kind of people that have had disagreements on this topic that were highlighted just now should take the next 2 weeks to basically iterate on that, and so that we have the most information possible for starting that discussion in earnest in 2 weeks. Perfect. Then I think, unless there's any remaining comments, anything that is urgent that we need to discuss right now, we have only a few minutes left anyway, but I think we otherwise finished with the agenda. Any remaining topic? If not, then yeah, thank you very much. It was great to host these 2 ORCODEVs, and also happy to have the professionals take back over next week. See you all next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.